The following are signs that you are starting to become a mature chess player, and if you still enjoy sacking your pieces on f7, then who gives up? Do whatever the hell makes you happy. Okay, so the first thing on my list is that you're starting to evaluate all kinds of captures, even if they seem totally ridiculous. Here I have the black pieces, and I'm playing the world famous Umberto, who has the white pieces, one of the best 1588s on chess.com. And in response to my f6 move, they played a c4 move. It must be said that my position is horrible. I just knew I was losing. My pieces are kind of offside. The action is around the black king side, and white's pieces are sort of ideally placed for an attack. And in this position, I thought, well, we might as well take this bishop here on g5, open up this rook, try to create some complications down this f-file. They played c takes d5, material is totally equal. And if I cast my mind back to a few years ago when I started playing chess, autumn of 2020, I'll just move my knight. However, I thought about rook takes f3. Like, why can't I play rook takes f3? Doesn't rook takes f3 create complications in this game? And indeed it does. I do play rook takes f3, which turns out to be the top engine move. And my calculation at the time was, well, after say g takes f3, knight takes d4, we pinch a pawn, they get their pawn back because we have bishop takes h7, king takes h7, queen takes d4, but then we do pinch this d5 pawn. And this was as far as I thought in my head. And I thought, well, white must be winning. However, this bishop is just as good as a rook. The king is somewhat unsafe. You're definitely not going to resign in a position like this. That was my thinking. After rook takes f3, my opponent pretty much throws the game away by playing this move d takes c6. And now they're busted because of queen takes c6, and if they dare take this rook here on f3, then we have queen takes f3, and there's no stopping mates. The engine just wants you to start hanging all your pieces, d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes h7, king takes h7, queen takes d5, and obviously no player is going to play like that. They're just going to resign in this position. Not seeing this queen takes c6 move, I stupidly played this move, rook takes d3, threatening to take the queen, but it doesn't matter because after c takes b7, my opponent is basically saying, take my queen, I'm just going to get a new queen here on a8 and take the rook in the process. And of course, realizing this, I have to play with a full rook down. I do go on to swindle this game here. Let's fast forward the moose. Look at that white flag here, or black flag over the white king. So I managed to save the game. But what's important about this is that things are starting to change in my thinking as a chess player. Definitely a few years ago, rook takes f3 would just not be on my radar. And this is just a habit that you need to get into. Okay, your calculation might be off, but you want to put moves like this in your radar to see whether they can work. Okay, so the second thing on my list is understanding that you need to give back material sometimes in your games. That is the only way to keep the game level or in your favor. It's very hard for new players to the game to do this. They try to cling on to everything. And so in this position, I have a 2-pawn advantage. Curiously, the engine doesn't see that as anything. It just says there's an even game here. I have the white pieces. And my opponent plays this very interesting move, bishop takes e2. And I knew what was coming because after rook takes e2, we have knight f3 check. And you're kind of forced to take. You obviously can't move your king here because queen h2 is checkmate. And if you move your king here, then you're going to have another check. So sensible thing to do here is bishop takes f3. We have g takes f3. And it was in this position that I realized I can't move my rook. And that was probably a part of my opponent's calculation, is that they could sack their bishop, getting some material back later, in this case the rook. And just as an illustration, if you move your rook, try to save it, you've lost because of queen h3. And yes, you're guarding against mates here on g2 because of this knight, but there's no stopping this rook from going to h6 and helping black deliver a mate here on h1. There's no stopping it. And so in this position, I do accurately or correctly understand that I have to give back material. However, I just do it in the wrong way. I play this move rook on a to e1. And it's just the same principle as before. We have queen to h3. And again, there's no stopping rook h6 and then mate here on h2. You might want to pause the video, because if you look at the evaluation bar right now, you'll see that white is actually winning. If you haven't looked at the lines and got the answer, there is a beautiful defense in this position here for white. which does involve giving back material, but in a way different to the way I did it. So I'll give you a few seconds, see if you can work it out. Well done if you did. Of course, the move is knight to g2. Very beautiful. Gary Kasparov says chess is a game of infinite beauty, and this definitely is a really, really nice move. Because in this position, if, say, for example, black decides to take the knight here on g2, then this idea of getting the queen to h3, h6, mate here on h1 doesn't work, because this queen can get back in time. Let's say you have something like queen h3 now, we've got this check, the king moves, and we can push for an exchange. So instead, in this position, where the material is forked, they decide to take the rook, we have this move knight to f4. And okay, black is +1 in material. However, curiously, white is winning. And this knight is just ideally placed because there's no pawn that can ever challenge it. And most importantly, it is a guardian of the g2 and h3 squares. So it's kind of a beautiful defense. Obviously, a very, very difficult position to play, but nonetheless, white is winning in this position. And so this is just one of these things in your development as a chess player where you look at positions where you have a material advantage and you just got to have the coolness to say to yourself, well, actually, in this position, I'm going to have to give something back. Okay, so the third thing on my list is that you're no longer engaging in all-out attacks and underestimating your opponent's resources to defend. Here, my opponent, Marak 57699, much better than Marak 57698, has the white pieces. They're playing Alireza Firouzja styles chess, h4, g4, going for an explosive attack here on the black king. However, when you look at this, it looks toothless. They have knights here on the edge of a board. They have a bishop that's stuck behind its own pawn, a rook that's sleeping, a queen that's just looking after the g5 pawn. And okay, this rook on h1 is pretty good, but if you had to eyeball this, you'd probably say black is winning. And in this position, I come up with this weak move, d4. Okay, the hardest games to win are the ones that already won. A better move would have been e4, followed by knight e5, knight d3 check, very menacing. But okay, we have d4, c4, d3, queen to d1, knight to b4. We can't just hang around. We've got to create complications on the other side of the board as well. h5, knight to e4, h8 g6, f8 g6, open up the f file, create possible problems here on the f2 square. We have queen to f3, kind of expecting that. Your opponent has one idea here. They're going to play queen h3. They're going to try and deliver this check and create all kinds of mayhem. We have knight to g5, stopping that knight, queen g3, and now a prophylactic move, queen to e7, keeping an eye on the 7th rank and this square one day. We have long castles, a bit late in the day for that. d4, going for a dark squared bishop exchange. I feel that this would definitely help me with all these weaknesses around the white king. They make my life easier with this move. Bishop takes g7, queen takes g7, and definitely in this position after king b1, perhaps this white king should have stayed in the center. I feel totally comfortable. There's absolutely no threat here on the black king. We have knight to f3, knight to e1, rook f8, knight takes f3, rook takes f3, stealing a tempo on the queen. The queen's got to move, and now we have rook to f8. Okay, very, very commanding position. Rook to f1, queen d7, rook h3, and now knight to c2. And finally, my opponent cracks with this move, king to b2. And you do your tactics puzzle the whole time. Always check for checks. The winning move here is queen to g7 check. There's no way white can look after its knight here. Even worse than that, after the king moves, knight takes a3. White can't even stop mate. Look at the top right of your screen. You have all mate in ones here. Rook takes f3 is a try, but we can ignore that. We deliver a check here on a1, which is obviously mate. But it's an important sign in your journey as a chess player is that you're doing less of this kind of stuff where you're throwing your pieces up the board without really thinking about your opponent's ability to defend. And even worse, in this position, my opponent's pieces are kind of misplaced and can't really support the attack. Okay, so the fourth thing on my list, similar to the third example, is that you're biding your time. You're not forcing. You're understanding that chess is a game of mistakes. You can develop a solid position and wait for your opponent to crack. And so my opponent here has the white pieces, example from Lichess, d4, b6, b6 against everything, following Lawrence Trent's b6 against everything course. We have knight to f3, bishop b7, e3. Okay, and college system player, and you got to get used to this when you're playing chess at my level, beginners, intermediates. There's going to be a lot of system-based players. The idea here is to put their bishop on d3, maybe c3, maybe castles, regardless of what black is doing. And so there's a temptation when your opponents play like this to try and come up with some idea to deal with this, but you don't need to. The disadvantage of playing openings like this is that it's not really critical for black. I mean, black can just do a lot of things. And so try not to force, stay calm. We have here e6, knight on b to d2, knight f6, bishop d3, bishop e7, b3. And now this bishop on b2 is going to be a threat. We have castles and castles, immediately playing d5 in this position. And that's kind of an interesting move because I do shut down my own bishop, but I'm conscious of the fact that I don't really want to activate this bishop at the moment. And so d5 for the time being locks down the center. We have bishop b2, bishop a6, a bit weak, trying to exchange off the light squared bishops. This light square bishop is ideally placed, pointing at the h7 square. My opponent can bat this away with c4. They find a very good move here. We have d takes c4, b takes c4. And in this position, I calmly, coolly find this move c5. Again, not trying to do much here. It's definitely a move that I would not have found a few years ago when I started playing chess. c5 is an interesting move here. If they take, obviously they're going to lose their bishop. And if they push, then that's just a free pawn. They can't take because they're going to lose their bishop. And so I just calculated in my head, c5 just must be right. Try to play c5 before you put your knight on c6. Okay, we have rook to e1, knight to c6, a3. Not much is going on. We have here now c takes d4, knight takes d4. It's all about to kick off now. Knight takes d4. And of course, the only move in this position that white can play is e takes d4. And what does my opponent do? They play this move, bishop takes d4. And of course, you do your tactics puzzle the whole time. This is a losing mistake. You know how to win this game now. It is, of course, the move e5. And if you want to save your dark squared bishop, then you are going to lose your light squared bishop. And so my opponent plays on a few more moves. We grab the bishop. We try to consolidate our position, make sure we have total control here over this d file. And my opponent just completely cracks, hangs their queen, and if they decide to take, they are going to get checkmated. But you got to ask yourself, okay, this is a system-based opening. Was I really doing anything in that game? Not really. Okay, just developing my pieces, looking for c5, playing d5 as well in this position, trying to make sure I had some control over this bishop here along this diagonal. Not much going on in this game. Not forcing. It's a very, very important thing that we all need to learn to do. Okay, one bonus tip before you go. This is where I lose everyone according to my YouTube analytics. You guys are just rushing to watch the next Gambit video, guys. Cut it out. That stuff doesn't work. Is that you are thinking about neutralizing your opponent's threats very early on. And so let me give you an illustration. I play b3. And the reason I love playing this is because after e5, bishop b2, very few players in and around my level know how to sort of control the threat of this bishop. It's a big problem. Let's say knight c6. C4 is the line that I play, bishop c5. And now we have a problem where the dark square bishop for black is sort of liable to attack, whereas my bishop is quite active in the game. And really, I'm going to leave my pawn here on e3, and this bishop isn't going to do anything. Where I have trouble in my games is that after b3 is when players play this move knight to f6. And I know what's coming because after bishop b2 they play g6, let's say knight f3, bishop g7, g3, castles, and bishop g2 and castles as well. The important point here is that black has neutralized the dark squared threat here from white. And that's just a sign that you're trying to control the game early on. There's nothing wrong with those e5 lines, but here we're trying to keep the game under control. And so hopefully you enjoyed that video. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. Put a comment below, guys. Come on, guys. Grow light squares. Thank you very much for your time.